Hi, I'm Clark, and today I'd like to talk to you about money, goals, and little everyday choices that can help you lead a successful life. For those of you that aren't familiar with our channel, we normally do videos on how to sail and wonderful places that we go to. My wife and I sail a 50-year-old sailboat, and we travel all over the world. This video is going to be a little different. This is a little more personal. This is me kind of telling you my story of how I was able to retire young and lead this life. I hope it can be inspirational to you. Even from a very young age, I've wanted to live an intentional life. I didn't necessarily have the name for it back then, but I wanted to live honorably. I wanted to live on my own terms. I wanted to live in a way that was right, but not in a way where I was following the herd, not in the way that I was doing what other people wanted me to do. Lately, there seems to be a trend for people to live a little more frugally, a little lighter on the world. You see that with tiny house people. My wife used to do that. You see that with us cruisers. We live out here quite lightly. And I see that with a group that's referring to their idea as FIRE, F-I-R-E, stands for Financial Independence and Retire Early. It's kind of all the same thing. Make some money. Don't spend everything you make. Don't live paycheck to paycheck so that you can be free and not live a life where you're just accumulating stuff to impress others or impress yourself. The minimalists are kind of doing the same thing, though maybe they're not working so hard to retire young, but they're still kind of trying to spend less and not accumulate stuff as their personal badge. I've been living this way for a very long time. If you're contemplating a lifestyle change in this direction, I thought it might be helpful to see what happens when you've done this for like 30 years. Let's start out with my story. I grew up in a farming town in northern New York State. My dad was a barber. My mom was a secretary when I was first born and became a stay-at-home mom. Later on, she got a degree and became a school nurse. We didn't have a huge amount of money. We had enough, though. We always had food. We always had shelter. We never had worries. But we just didn't have enough to have that new fancy car and trendy clothes. And it just wasn't our thing to try to keep up with the Joneses. I'm really glad I was raised that way. After I finished college, I found a job locally in northern New York. It wasn't a great job. It's not a really industrial or technological part of the world, and I do tech. And also, it was the middle of the recession in the 80s. This recession was bad. The unemployment numbers were worse than the 2007 recession that, well, Wiki calls the Great Recession. So it was the job I could find. I was a little bored with the job, and it didn't pay very well. Because that job was so boring, I started consulting during the day. I started meeting with local businesses and showing them how to use a PC. PCs had just come out. I mean, they were the first ones. But right along with the first PCs were the first clones. So I would show them they could save a lot of money by buying a clone, help them buy them. I would write custom software for them sometimes. Sometimes I would just show them how to use word processors. But anyway, it taught me that I could be a consultant, basically. I didn't have to necessarily work for a company with a paycheck. I did a little better. I bought a sailboat. I bought a 25-foot sailboat, and I had never owned a sailboat before. I'd only been sailing like twice in my life at that point. I worked at a kids camp and found some sailboats and ended up teaching sailing. That was the first time I ever did it. But sailing really intrigued me. So I bought this boat, and I'm sailing it around Lake Ontario. And one day I found myself out at some little island on Lake Ontario alone. No friends came that day. And I'm reading a magazine, Cruising World, I think it was. And it had an article on the economics of, well, living the lifestyle I have now. And I realized it's achievable. It's a big deal, but it's not something that can't be done. I knew I was going to have to work hard. I knew I was going to have to take some risks, but I became kind of a goal for me to try to retire young and get out and see the world on these terms. It was really important. That article changed my life. So pretty short order after that, I found a contracting gig in Austin, Texas. I helped IBM develop OS2. I quit my day job. Big risk there because I was just hired to come and do it. If they didn't like me, they would kick me out. But there was more money and it was a much more interesting project. That one went well. I started doing some other projects, and next thing you know, my client list was IBM, Boeing, Starbucks, AT&T, a bunch of other ones you haven't heard of, but doing interesting things. I was successful by basically anybody's standard, and I didn't quite live like other people who were doing what I was doing. I was still a barber's son. I really didn't have this concept that money was happiness, that stuff was happiness. For me, money was freedom chips, a way to not have to work later. I had this saying that if you make more than you spend, you're rich. And if you spend more than you make, you're poor. And the scale of it doesn't matter. This is before Donald Trump was president or anything like that. He was like my poster child of how not to live, to be in bankruptcy every 5 years, you know? It didn't matter if he was doing it at the $1 million level. As far as I was concerned, he was poor. I tried to be rich. So I lived on the rich side of that. I put money away and I invested it, and I set myself up to be able to retire young. But not to say I didn't spend anything. When I was 27, I sold my 25-foot boat and I bought a larger one. I bought the one that I'm, well, sitting in right now. I spent $55,000 on her. She can cross oceans. She is a very sound hull, but she was in bad shape. So I had to tear her down and build her back up. It took about 8 or 10 years of work while I was working. And during those 8 or 10 years, I did a lot of work on myself too. I prepared myself for this long voyage. One advantage of buying a boat as your, well, obsession or hobby is it can be home. So I did save some money by not having an apartment anymore. I just moved right aboard the boat. Of course, the boat and its slip cost much more than the apartment, but I was going to have the boat anyway. So I tried to save money any way I could. In 2000, I was 36 years old, and I realized I had enough. Not enough in frustration. I loved my job, but I had enough money put away. I had enough to achieve my dreams, and I wasn't going to just keep chasing something. So the right thing for me to do at the time was to close down my corporation right at the height of my income and take off sailing. It was a wonderful time to be an engineer. There was the tech boom going on. It was really great. Closed it all down, got in my boat and went south. Literally within months, the tech boom bubble crashed. The market dove. I lost so much money in the market, but since I had this minimalist mindset, and since I really was living on very little money before when I was saving, I just tightened my belt, stayed at this lower income level, as it were, and rode it through. Since I didn't spend my principal, it came back. It took a while, but it came back. The point is, I was able to live on very little, and actually out sailing was easier because there weren't commercials in my face saying, buy this, be happy, buy this, be happy. I had a beautiful dive to go down and look at fish. That cost nothing. Over the next 20 years, I sailed this boat 20,000 ocean miles. I visited 14% of the world's countries. I had some amazing adventures. Because of the decisions I made in my 20s, I've been able to live a life sailing. I've been able to visit the warm parts of the world, get close and personal, and meet other cultures, hang out with some really cool people. Now I'm 55. I've got friends who are still working and hoping to retire. I've got friends that didn't make it to retire. They're dead. They're never going to have these adventures. I'm so glad that I made those decisions in my 20s and I stuck with them in my 30s and 40s. And it's given me such a wonderful life. I want to encourage you, regardless of your age, to live your best life. Come up with a plan and stick with the plan. I can tell you that little everyday choices can make a huge difference in adding up to a wonderful life. How do you do this? Where do you start? I started with something that I call the economy of enough. The economy of enough boils down to two things. Number one, understand your goals. What makes you happy? What will make you happy? You're thinking about your whole life here. For me, it was having financial independence and having the freedom to go off sailing. For you, it's going to be something else, but decide what that is. You have to choose something that's actually achievable. If it's not achievable, you're never going to get there. And you have to find it exciting. If it doesn't excite you, there's no sense living a life without passion. Choose wisely. You only get to make this choice once. It's just not going to be time to restart. Once you have an achievable, exciting goal, that's your definition of enough. It's enough to make you happy, it's enough to give your life meaning, and it's enough to keep you going. Most importantly, it's a point that you can reach. If you don't have a definition of enough, you're cursed to chase more, and more is just never achievable. Without that definition of enough, knowing that you've succeeded to get to it, a million isn't enough. 10 million isn't enough. The whole world wouldn't be enough. You need to have your own definition of enough to find happiness. Number two, commit to making daily choices that will let you get to your goal. This is how you're going to use a little of that chasing more to get to your enough. If your life goal requires any money at all, and let's face it, they all do, you're going to need some money. Achieving my goal of retiring young and finding financial independence had a lot to do with my saving and spending habits. Most of what I'm going to talk about now is about saving money, how to build wealth through delayed gratification. What do I mean by that? Let me first tell you about marshmallows. There's a really well-known and simple psychological test that's given to kids, and it's like the best indicator of how well they'll do in later life. It's called the marshmallow test. And how it works is the researcher gives this little kid a marshmallow. And he says, this is your marshmallow. You can eat it. You can do whatever you want. But if you don't eat it, and I'm going to leave the room for a bit. And if you don't eat it, when I come back, if you still have the marshmallow, I'm going to give you another marshmallow. Now, this is a really cool test. You can just Google it, look it up on YouTube, and it's fun to watch because this little kid's trying not to eat marshmallows. The point is, though, that the kids that can delay gratification, the kids that don't eat their marshmallow, are the kids that later on in life can not have that $5 Starbucks coffee because they can know $5 extra in my Schwab account is going to mean $10,000 when I need it. It's just the way you should live life. It's so telling of a test. If I had kids, I'd give the kids the test. And I'd use it as a training thing. I'd just give them the test occasionally until they got it, until they realized, hey, if I don't eat the marshmallow, I get 2 marshmallows. I think it would train a kid later in life. I think in our society, most people eat their marshmallows right away. And I'm going to teach you or tell you how I, anyway, got to financial success by saving marshmallows, by putting off these instant gratification purchases and saving the money for when I can do really cool stuff with it and have freedom. Let's talk about the way to save up some marshmallows. Number one, we're going to talk about work. When it comes to work, choose a profession that you're good at, but choose a profession that is something people want and choose something that pays well. Many minimalists think that money just doesn't matter, and they go into jobs that just don't pay well. It's important to actually make money, if you're going to follow this model, while you're young, in a small amount of time, or you're not going to be able to retire young. So again, find something that people need, do it really well, and demand a fair payment for your efforts. The world basically doesn't need another waiter. What we need is a welder. There's always a demand for welders. You put 6 months into learning to weld, and you're going to get paid well. Bottom line, understand the economy of what's valued out there and pursue a career that will let you maximize your income early. The next topic is savings. You need a long-term savings account for your retirement. and you need a short-term working savings account just to live off of. Whenever money comes in, pay yourself. Take some of that money and put it in that long-term savings. Once it's in there, it's invested. It never comes out again until you are retired. You don't say, there's a big expensive toy, I want it, I'll use that. Nope, that money is just locked. Your short-term account is what you need to live on. You shouldn't be going paycheck to paycheck. You actually should be using money in that account that's a little bit old. If you're spending everything in that account, you're doing it wrong. You should have enough left over in this account to actually slip some more into that investment account. When you do write that check to yourself because you saved some money on not buying a latte or whatever, you should feel really good. The brain chemistry you make in this is an important part of it. You should celebrate when you're able to put more money in that long-term retirement account. Let's talk about spending. You should decide what you can spend based on what you need, not based on how much money is in your account. You want to avoid lifestyle inflation, especially when you're in 20s and your 30s. Your peers are going to start spending a lot of money around you. You're not keeping up with them. You're living a different life. Avoid the temptation to spend that extra money to show your success. Live below your means. You've got a longer goal in mind. Let's talk about skills. Our society spends a lot of money on convenience, basically paying for other people's time. Part of saving money is learning how to do stuff for yourself. For example, your car needs an oil change. You can pay someone to do it, but you can do it yourself. And once you've done it, you now know how to do it. Trust me, it's trivial. Brake pads, same thing. Really, really easy job. You can do it in a driveway someplace. Once you've learned to do that, you've kind of got the confidence to start learning to do other things. The more things like this that you put in your belt, the more things you know how to do yourself, the more you can save. Keep this up and eventually your collection of skills will become vast. You can take better care of yourself with less money. Let's talk about food. You can save a lot of money by eating cheaply. I've done it to get through bad times, but it's no way to live life. What I'm suggesting here is just don't blow money on food. You can save a lot of money by learning to cook yourself. It's another skill, just like your car, and it'll save. There's a lot of other ways to save money. Pack your lunch. Don't order coffee on the way to work. Don't go to restaurants as much. Buy a steak at home. Learn to cook it well. When you do go out to a restaurant, order water instead of some crazy drink. And whatever you do, don't buy bottled water. If the restaurant's water isn't good enough to drink, why are you eating their food? It was made with that water. Emily and I love to throw dinner parties, and that's kind of how we get that food being better feeling. Not going out to a restaurant and paying someone to carry food to our table, but making food for friends and sharing it with them. And then they reciprocate, and we have much more intimate, wonderful evenings that way. Bottom line is, you eat 3 times a day. It's a really big opportunity for savings. Even saving $1 a meal adds up a lot over the long haul. Let's talk about housing. Housing is a really major expense. It's probably your largest expense. And because of that, it's an opportunity to save a lot of money. There's a lot of people out there that kind of organize their whole life around owning some big, crazy, expensive house. They spend 30 years paying for it, and it owns them. Because housing is such a big expense, it's your biggest opportunity for savings. I saved a lot of money by living on my boat. I was going to own this boat anyway. It was my obsession. If I had this boat and tried to keep a house or an apartment, that's a lot of money. So I lived on the boat. Emily, my wife, she did it a different way. She's a tiny house person. So she lived in, well, tiny houses. You probably know what those things are. If not, look them up. It's pretty cool. She minimized her housing expenses by literally minimizing her house. And she had the advantage of just not having a lot of room to collect stuff, much like on the boat. It's liberating. Probably those two approaches aren't right for you, but there's going to be something that's right for you. Some way of savings. Living a little bit outside of the city can save a lot of money. Or even living in the city but in a less expensive neighborhood. Without HOA fees or a bunch of Joneses to keep up with, you can save a lot of money on your housing. And if you live outside of the city, you avoid the temptation of spending money on nightlife. There just won't be as much out there. Emily and I live on a boat anchored in a beautiful natural bay, and that decision has turned our living expense, at least the housing part of it, to zero. Bottom line, rethink the size, location, and format of your housing. You might be able to save. Let's talk about cars. Cars are like the most rapidly depreciating item you'll ever buy. It's a big opportunity to save money. Buy an older car and learn to maintain it yourself. Buying a brand new car is just throwing money down the drain. That doesn't mean you can't drive a nice car. I drive what is probably one of the best luxury cars ever made. And I bought it at 65,000 miles for $4,500. Emily has a car that's older than her, but it's a really cool car and it's fun to drive. If you want to know more, ask in the comments, but I won't get into the details on the cars here. Bottom line, don't buy a new car. Buy something that's like 5 years old, but make sure it's a really good quality car. Nobody wants a 5 or 10-year-old Kia, but an old Mercedes or a Porsche, that's still a really good car. And there's a lot of good choices in the middle. Also, learn to maintain your own car. We talked about that in the skills section. There's a lot of opportunities to save money taking care of your own car. If you stick with an older, inexpensive car, you really don't need to carry collision insurance. I mean, you can literally just buy another one for what the collision would cost in like 2 or 3 years. Just stick with the minimum liability that your local government requires, and you're going to save a lot. This list could just go on and on. But there's one more thing I want to talk about. That's relationships. It's very important that your long-term relationships are compatible with your goals. If you live with roommates or have a lot of friends that don't share these goals, it's going to be difficult to keep frugal. Likewise, if you're in a relationship with someone that finds joy by spending and chasing more, it's going to be doomed to failure. Either you're just not going to make your goal or the relationship's going to suffer. Emily and I were both married before, and probably the biggest problem with both of our relationships were our partners didn't understand enough. They were still chasing something. They didn't understand when, at least we felt, we had found enough. So bottom line, try to find someone to share your life with that understands and agrees with your idea of living frugally. It can make life a lot better. And of course, when you get to the point of deciding whether you want to start a family, that makes a huge difference financially. You can live frugally with kids, but understand, whatever you do, your costs are going to grow, and you're going to lose a lot of control over your life. In the US, it costs $250,000 to raise a kid to adult age, and our population is booming. The planet is full. Take that into consideration. If you do decide to have children, have a small family. And by all means, give those kids the gift of letting them understand enough and find joy in enough. The biggest thing about the concept of enough is this. One day, if you do everything right and you meet your goal, you'll be there. Realize when you're there. Stop. Just don't keep striving for things and position. When you've got enough, you've got enough. Now it's time to live for yourself. This sounds trivial. This sounds like duh, you know, but it isn't. I know the stress I went through when I retired. I couldn't identify it because it seems like everything was perfect, but society had raised me to keep wanting to keep striving. I stopped, and it took a couple years to feel good. My wife Emily is running a corporation right now. She does management consulting. She's not going to be doing that forever, and she's starting to think about shutting it down, and she knows, and she also knows because I've told her it's going to be stressful. Prepare for that. Achieving is addictive. You're going to want to continue to try for more. It's like natural. It's probably the human condition. But when you're there, take some time to live for yourself. And you can always go back to work. You just really deserve to try the other way for a while once you've achieved it. Let it feel good. Everyone should have their own philosophy. If my concept of enough rings true with you, use it. It's yours. If not, try to find something else, but lead that intentional life. Have intention in how you want to live. I hope sharing my experience has allowed you to feel maybe a little less alone and more inspired to lead your own better life. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with a friend. I really want to thank you guys for watching. The guys that subscribed, thanks a lot. And really, special thanks for those of you who've decided to be our patrons on Patreon. We never really thought that would happen. It's quite exciting to see the support come in. Thanks again. Bye.